21 Grams is back, and welcome to the third iteration of our show. And in this iteration, we are offering a one-on-one interview with indie artists, and we're going to examine three very specific aspects of the creative soul. The cerebral, which will be all about the chess moves and deep thoughts that go into the aspects of the work and creating the work. The emotional, which will be all about the investment the artist has made in the work and creating it. And the practical, which will all be about the application of common practices, tropes, and ideas. In this episode, we welcome Tim Niederriter. He's a fantasy author whose depth of character and penchant for detail has led to a numerous amount of series. He also hosts a podcast called Alive After Reading. That being said, I'm your host, Joe Compton, and let's get deep into it. Here now is a new episode of 21 Grams. Yes, hello everybody. Welcome to 21 Grams. I should clarify right off the bat. So I had, Tim and I had this scheduled, a while ago, where we were going to do it earlier, and then we didn't do it. That was on me. And then it got all screwed up, and then I was going to do Julia Allen in front of you last Sunday, and I couldn't do that because I was at Multiverse, and I didn't realize I rescheduled that. So, it says episode 6, but it's really episode 5. So don't worry about the episode. I don't think anybody cares. But
it says episode 5 on my screen down below.
Yeah. Well, down
it
below.
It says it now. Yeah.
5, but it says in the description episode 6, because originally when I had set this up, it was episode 6. But yeah, I'll fix all that. But it's just clerical error on my part, so don't worry about it. Hi, Tim. How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right, Joe. It's an interesting time for me. I'm kind of going through a rough patch. The whole year's been kind of tough, but it's been okay. Lately it's getting better, and I always say that. I feel like I say that all the time when I talk to you, but I have a positive outlook. Let me put it that way.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. I'm glad to hear that you have a positive outlook. I know you were really going through it earlier in the year. That was a tough time for you, I remember. But we won't talk about that. Let's accentuate the positive. Let's talk about you and your incredible writing and your style and everything like that. Because I'm fascinated by the idea that the way your brain works in terms of writing these series. Is that a product of how you read as a kid? Did you read a lot of series and that's why you became a series writer, or was it just happenstance that a lot of these became series? Is the approach, because you're a plotter, so you plot.
No, I'm not a plotter. I'm not a plotter. I'm a discoverer. No,
Okay,
I think you're mistaking me with someone else. I discover all my. I sometimes plot a little bit, but mostly I discover the series. In fact, I can't actually plot and finish a book. That's probably what I've talked about that before. When I try to plot, I'm like, okay, this is good. Now I don't need to write it. I write the whole. I've written the story. It's done. So I don't do that I did it for a few of my books, but none of the ones that I think are published have been plotted extensively.
Yeah, maybe that was what we talked about the last time we talked about that then, because I just remember we were talking about plotting in some aspect of it, but so is that how you operate? Do you like to write in series, or is that just happenstance with the subject matter that you're tackling at the time?
I think a few of my series were kind of intentionally. We're always going to be series. The Demon Hunter series, which is ongoing, was always going to be a series. But most of the other ones, I didn't envision being more than one book. And I can see up in the corner, this is one book. It might not become more books, honestly. Even though I did put a series title on it, it's a pretty complete story as it is. So I'm not sure if that one will actually get a sequel. Most of the other ones, though, I designed around series for pragmatic reasons, really.
Mm-hmm.
Because as an independent author, I kind of felt the need to make it potentially possible for me to keep going with any of the books that I started. So that's not really the artisty answer.
No, no, that's totally
That's just
fine.
the
No,
practical answer. I'm
no,
not a
it's
big series
honest.
fan, though. Honestly, I'm a solo author. As far as a solo fan of reading books that just kind of I read them, I get done with them. In fact, it's kind of part of my life philosophy that I mean, art should be kind of transitory. You should be able to complete a piece of work when you're reading it or watching it, and if you can't, it can be frustrating, and you're not getting the most out of it sometimes. So.
That's awesome.
That's where I stand on that. It's kind of the opposite
Yeah,
of what
no,
I actually do.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, that's awesome. You know, in terms of the series that you did kind of plan out or kind of knew were going to be series, is that a different approach for you writing wise than writing a standalone, or just because, like you said, you're a discoverer? So, you know, are you discovering a lot more when you're writing a standalone than you are a series because you have to kind of be careful of how to plan that out so that you have material for the next books? Do you not understand why?
Not really, because I mean, honestly, I discovered more. Like with Demon Hunter is a great example because I went back from my initial series outline when I started the books. Awesome. Hi, Josh. So,
I Josh.
so the thing about Demon Scroll, for example, is that takes place before where I originally envisioned the series beginning. It's kind of a prequel, but it's the first book in the series because I didn't write anything before it. Time wise, in real life. So, but it goes back and it's like, okay, so it's going to start when the characters are younger or a little younger than they're going to be. And I introduce new characters that I didn't know were going to be in the book at all. And now they're going to be series characters. So you might say that it really went off immediately. The series completely changed by virtue because I had that world. I've been planning it for. I mean, I kind of had it in the back burner. I had some of the main characters in my head for 15 years, and then when I started working on them, like new characters started presenting themselves and became very important pretty much immediately. Replaced the old ones; they just joined them.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it is more of a. Do you find that is that frustrating for you, or you feel like it's kind of a cool way to write?
I love it actually. When I say it like I just did, I think it's really fun and it's enjoyable because then I have this kind of new twist on everything, and I think it makes the story less predictable because if I started with the first few chapters I ever wrote for the Demon Hunter series were back when I was in high school, and I wrote them, and they involved one the immortal Hadrian, who's like a central character of the series now, but they involved him at his low point. He was in a really bad place, challenging people to duels and shit. But it was that he really shouldn't be. It wasn't like an honorable duel. It was like, no, you shouldn't be trying. You're trying to kill a guy. That's not good. And if people have read any of the books, they know he's he's heroic for for the series so far. But he's a everyone's got their depths, you might say. But I went back to a point where he was acting much better, and then he's not even really the main character for either of the first two books. He's a main character, but he's not the main character, and that to me makes it more interesting when by book 3 he takes on a more central role, and I think that's really cool, structurally speaking.
So I mean, you it sounds like your characters dictate a lot of how you present a story. Is that part of the discovery process? Is letting the characters speak to you a little bit so that you can find the central story and kind of weeding through all of that?
Absolutely. I'm so bad at getting to know characters that I mean, in the end I do it, but it takes forever, and therefore I don't know. I can't do it before I start writing. I can't do like pre-writing or exercises enough to understand who the characters are going to be when the rubber hits the road, so to speak. They always surprise me. Yeah.
I'm curious by the method that you're talking about. It would seem to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but and maybe you do this as you write. maybe not in the first draft, but maybe a second or third one. But it would seem to me that going by what people what's being dictated to you, as opposed to focusing them into one space, would create a lot of editing. Do you find that you do a lot of editing, or are you editing as you go so that you don't have to worry, because finding the core of the story is super important with fantasy, especially, right?
Yeah.
I mean, world building is another important aspect of it, but really honing a story, because you'll lose a reader really fast in fantasy if you don't have the narrative pointing toward the narrative and the point of view of the character, right? So I'm curious, is editing kind of something that you do a lot of?
Not really. I mean, well, in some sense, yes, but not content editing. I mean, I do tons of line editing, partially because I dictate my books, and that requires a lot of line editing just to make them readable. But I don't actually do that much re-editing of the story. In fact, if the story really goes off the rails, I'll just write the book again, which I've done.
Interesting.
With the second Demon Hunter book, I wrote 2 versions of it, and I published the second one because the first version was so bad. It was like, no, this isn't what I want, and so I made a different version of it. Had some new characters, and this works now.
That's
and that's the closest I've gotten to redoing the and that's, I guess maybe that's where you got the rewriting thing, actually, because I did rewrite that book from scratch in 2020. Yeah, 2020.
That's interesting, because it's like, so instead of trying to, it's bad right off the bat, I would assume, right? You feel how
yeah, pretty much. It was the wrong book. It wasn't a bad book. It was just the wrong book.
Right. Sorry, I misspoke. But you know that it's not the story you wanted to tell pretty quickly, I would assume.
I mean, pretty quickly after writing an 80,000 word novel. Yes.
yeah, of course. Yeah.
I could tell right away when I went back to edit it that I didn't want to take it that direction. But because it was so quick to do it, I'm like, whatever, just start over.
Have you stopped midstream before? Have you ever stopped midstream? Or you just go until you get it all out, and then you?
No, I do. I stop. I still have a lot of unfinished books. And because I feel like if I don't get a grasp on the character, or if I get on the grasp on them too late, like if I get it, then it's hard for me to understand the book at all. And it can really, I mean, back when I was typing books, I wrote this book called Arsenal, which I'm currently rewriting. So that's another one. I guess I do rewrite a lot, but that one, but by rewrite, I mean, I finish the book, right? I have a new idea for a different direction to take that story.
Probably a much better writer than the first time you wrote it, I would assume, too.
Exactly, because I wrote the first draft of Arsenal in 2013, so I was not very, or 2014, so I was 24 years old. It's pretty easy to tell how old I am in a given year because I'm born in 90. So, but the thing about that book was that I wrote 60,000 words, again, a fairly large number of words, and then I said to myself, I don't know who the characters are. I don't understand where this book is going. What's going on here? And I loved the setting. I loved a bunch of things that were going on there. The code, I've since changed the name, and I'm definitely going to be working on that series in the future. It's an apocalyptic fantasy novel, so it's interesting in that regard. But it's still the same theme, but a very take on the characters and setting in some ways. Yeah,
I'm curious. Do you hold on to the alternate version that you've written that you don't publish? So, do you have designs at some point of publishing those at some point, or they're just going to stay on a shelf and collect dust for all time?
I mean, that's actually something I'm not sure if I'm comfortable talking about, to be honest, because I have done stuff with them, but under a pen name.
Okay.
I have produced a bunch of these alternate books under names that shall not be revealed, even here. Sorry, there's some secrets that just cannot be
it's fine.
broached on the internet.
That.
But in fact, I have published virtually all my work. All stuff is published in some fashion or other.
Are they that
you just need to know
different?
Where to look and
do that?
Read it. Yes, completely different text, very different stories.
Interesting.
And a lot of them are unfinished work. Uh, there's a lot of unfinished books that I published bits and pieces of in various places because there was enough book that I could publish parts of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting to me. So we'll steer away from that. Uh, talk a little bit. Talk a little bit about your approach, because another thing I find fascinating is I know you a little bit. We've had enough conversations to know that you're somebody who absorbs a lot of stuff. You like to read a lot. You like history.
Mm-hmm.
You like certain like you like eras and certain things like that. But you write in all kinds of different time periods and different settings and stuff like that. Uh, i- is that covering your interest for you, or are you trying to challenge yourself by being different in certain aspects of different series?
That's a good question. I feel like it's not a challenge to write different settings. It's a challenge to write the same setting every time for me.
Hmm.
I have very strong ADHD, but
Hmm.
also I love different worlds. I mean, it's kind of like George Lucas, right? George
Right.
Lucas was wanted to do all sorts of different movies, and then he got stuck doing Star Wars for most of his career. kind of an
Right.
ironic, kind of a what is that? Golden handcuffs kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but that's one of the reasons I'm resistant to writing series because I like very strange worlds and settings. Like for example, like 10 Years, one of my favorite books that I've written, is so different from all my other ones. Now I'm actually writing a series set in that world, but with different characters. And I didn't think I was ever going to go back there because I thought this is just so strange. I came up with alternative geographical features, with magic
Oh.
systems and stuff. But it's so weird in so many ways. All new animals, whole different
Mhm.
technology system. Yeah.
Are you
And
comfortable? Are you comfortable staying in the fantasy space though? Do you feel like that's also somewhere where you'd want to branch out? I know you've
I mean, I only write science
technically
fiction as well. Yeah.
right, right. I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
But all my
I know
science
that you
fiction has a fantasy twist to it. That's the thing.
right.
Almost all my science, like the Pillar Universe story, Origin of Storms. I say Pillar Universe, and that sounds like science fiction, but it could also be fantasy if you think about it, because it's a universe that doesn't make any sense in our physical science rules because it has different
Mhm.
rules. So it's a fantasy setting basically, but it's a science fiction story in that setting.
So you feel like you're always
So
gonna
weirdness.
yeah. Are you always gonna sprinkle a little bit of fantasy in everything you do then? Is that kinda how you
I
feel like?
think so. I think so. That's where I'm going right now.
Mhm.
When I look at the books I have up there, yeah, they're all fantasy to some degree or other.
Mhm.
Even the Mangrove Suite, which is yeah set in our world nominally in the future, still fantasy. Couldn't get away from it.
Has a little magic in there somewhere.
A little bit, at least it appears to be magic. Hmm. Yes.
Is that your favorite part of fantasy? Is the magic systems, creating systems, or maybe?
I don't know. I mean, that's a great question because I do like magic systems. I used to be more a fan of them than I am now.
Mhm.
I've gotten to the point where I've cooled toward making new ones. At least I really like some of the magic systems I've come up with, but now I just want to
Mhm.
explore them. So maybe I'm going to settle down somewhere for a while. That's kind of where I'm leaning.
You're also a big
I've
battle guy.
explored a lot of fantasy worlds.
Yeah, you like a
Yeah.
lot of battles. Is that something you enjoy
Another
writing?
thing that might be changing soon, though, I've written a
Yeah.
ton of battle scenes. Some of my favorites, again, like 10 Liars. I
Mhm.
wrote so many battle scenes that my favorite scene is the battle that doesn't have any description of the fighting in it. Or at least not all the. It just says the description of one of the main character getting hurt, which I've mentioned a few
Uh-huh.
times.
Interesting.
And basically, whenever she gets hurt, but otherwise, you don't know what's going on really.
Mhm.
And people have given me some nice compliments on it. That's why I always mention it because I'm very proud of it. But
Nice.
there's a few books. A few of my books are leaning toward military fantasy,
Mhm.
or action fantasy, I guess.
Mhm.
And I do like my battles, but I right now I'm not in the mood for them. So maybe that's all it is. I'm very emotionally based when it comes to what I want to write. So I was thinking, I'm not ready to battle now. I'm probably not in the mood to do it. So it's hard to say I like them that much when I'm not in the mood. but if you look at historically, yeah, all my books have battles and fights and stuff in them. So yeah, lots of fighting.
Yeah, like you
Yeah.
said, you've been kind of known for that a little bit. People have kind of gravitated toward your books because of the immense battle scenes and things like that. So, I
I
mean,
suppose so. The end of some of these books, I mean, I tend to build up the action, as this book goes on. It's pretty traditional technique, but
mhm.
by the time you get to the end of some of these books, it's like, oh, okay, now there's an enormous castle around the land like it's a giant dog, animated castle. Okay, that's going to be something that's going to cause some action. I guess action scenes are going to break out all around that thing. I'd imagine. That's how I roll. Yeah, fair enough.
The other thing about battle scenes, though, that I find fascinating that I kind of wanted to talk to you about a little bit too is it requires a lot of preparation in terms of not so much foreshadowing, although foreshadowing would play a part in a lot of that, but kind of the devil's in the details with a lot of these things,
Mm.
like the weapons that people choose, the way that they decide to go into battle. I mean, all of those things, the psychology behind a battle, who to kill, when to kill them, kind of idea. All of those things are little minor details. Are those fragmented for you when you're writing? Do you when you're because you're a discovery writer? Do you pull those out when you find them in your writing and kind of save it for the back end? You kind of go, oh, that's going to be good for the battle later, or are you somebody who just it just naturally flows into the battle for you?
Oh, it's quite natural. I don't, and just in general, I find I don't pull I try not to hold back because when I hold back, that's when things go wrong for me.
Mm,
I've written a number of books where I was trying to hold back something for a future book or the end of the book, and I find that it's much more effective for me to just go and do the thing as soon as as soon as it feels natural. And that's, I mean, that's a weird thing. I mean, I don't do a ton of foreshadow, honestly. At least I feel like I don't,
yeah,
because I'd rather just show the reader something fascinating, something interesting, something exciting, and then go from there. So, I mean, for me, it doesn't feel like foreshadowing, but it is something that will build up to a larger event later on. I just don't know what that'll be when I write the first thing.
well, you talked about how you write traditionally into a battle, and that's kind of traditionally into a battle. I mean, it's not so much that it's conscious foreshadowing as much as it is
Mhm.
subconscious a little bit in a lot of respect
Yes,
because
definitely.
you know because like like for example, like just thinking about like a battle scene, like somebody's climbing through trees and right and their arm gets scraped, and the first thing somebody notices in a battle is how their arm is scraped, so that's the weakness that they're going to attack, right? And that's kind of
Mm.
you would never think about any of that as being important until the battle happens, and then you realize, oh wow, that was a very important moment that maybe I should go back and even reread that because it was so important, even though that was probably the most mundane and obtuse, you know, uh, you know, opportunity for foreshadowing. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. No, there's an intricacy that goes into battle scenes, definitely,
mhm,
especially with a lot of moving parts, right? Because
right.
when you have a character, I mean, kind of a Star Wars esque, I'd actually say, like the original trilogy, the Star Wars trilogy ends with the battle. There's a battle on the moon, and there's a battle in space, and there's a battle inside the Death Star,
Yeah,
and that's
and
the
the
kind of scene that
battle
I
on
mean,
Endor,
those
and
those huge
yeah,
multiple scene battles, those huge multi scene battles, are
yeah,
actually very inspirational to me. And
right.
okay, and they interact with each other, right? Because you've got the perspective on the ground, where they blow up the shield generator, and they have the perspective in space, where they've got to just where they got to kill the Death Star eventually, but they can't do that till the shield generator's down. That kind of. And then there's the much more personal, moral struggle inside the throne room. But
Right.
and I do something like that in a couple of my bigger books. Demon Scroll and Origin of Storms come to mind, where there's these enormous conflicts at the end of the story, at the end of the volume, at least in the case of Demon Scroll. But they are always and there's little things that will happen, right? So characters will get battered in the fight, or obviously some characters will be killed, and sometimes it can be quite sudden when a character dies, which is interesting to me as well. It was definitely interesting to me when I was writing Demon Scroll. So that kind of the impact of a sudden death in battle, because battles are not, humans are fragile. Let me put it that way, and especially when you're talking about these mighty forces that magic can throw around, and you're not, or technology can throw around in the case of science fiction. There's no one tough enough to survive battle just by being tough, at least not in the real world. And I kind of like that approach to battle scenes as well in fiction.
It kind of leads into Josh's questions, which are: how much story do you plot in your battles? Do you choreograph them somehow, and like i.e. like a D&D campaign or something else?
Well, I do. Frequently, when I have like super powered characters with a lot of magic, I'll come up with what character can do using RPG stats. I'll just kind of get that down in quick form with like, this is their abilities, this is the stuff they are capable of doing. But I don't generally plan what they're actually going to do in the fight until the actual battle begins. Again, because I don't know what's going to be advantageous. What I often don't think that clearly about what environment they'll be in, that kind of thing. Definitely, there are some. Go on.
Oh, I was going to ask you: do you plot out who's going to die? At least, do you know who's going to die in that?
I mean, not always. No. In fact, most of the time, I don't know. Especially when it comes to a battle that has multiple people on each side. I don't know, or like there's characters on both sides of the battle. I definitely don't know, at least on the more antagonist side. I don't know who's going to die on that side specifically. I don't like to have it be written that all the bad guys die, so somebody almost always survives on that side. But there's a few battles where I'm like, I know somebody has to die in this fight. Some characters we care about are going to have to die, even in these bigger field battles.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily plan that in advance, no. I usually, but I do use kind of story logic to determine which character does die, usually. Sure. Instead of just using the low rationale of this is what would happen on a battlefield.
Have you ever...
yeah, no spoilers.
Have you ever killed someone and retracted it and rewrote it so that you didn't kill them because you didn't necessarily want them to die, but they died in the natural cause of you writing a battle?
Not really in any of my published work, no. I mean, there are a few times when people have been saved, or I mean, literally in one of my Twisted Gods books, one of the newer ones that I released, there's a character that dies, but then because that was actually one of the more premeditated things. This character dies and is brought back within the context of the world.
Oh, interesting.
But as like an undead creature. There's a few, and actually that's because that character. Yeah.
So no Jon Snow, no Jon Snowing it. You've killed him, and now he's a vampire, basically.
Basically, yes. I mean, in that case, that series is one of the main characters is the avatar of the god of death, or the god of the dead, rather.
Okay.
And so the god of the dead is the ability to reanimate corpses and turn them into basically zombies with souls. So they and then they live practically forever as undead beings. So they're somewhere between a vampire and a zombie. But it's not a pleasant fate, but they request this character to be brought back because people like she shouldn't have died. She shouldn't have died. And then it's like, okay, sure. He's going to be my slave for eternity. You really like that? He's not a nice guy, the god of death. But yeah. But he's like, I guess I'll take them. Take them all.
Interesting.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just babbling. I do that.
It's fine.
You know me.
So, in terms of like, do you kind of stay toward the logic of a battle? Is there kind of a rhyme and a reason for you in terms of battles, or do you like them to kind of go off the rails and kind of surprise you?
Well, that's a good question too. I find that there need to be some surprises, or the battle isn't going to be much of an exciting turning point in the story, which it often is in adventure fiction, or a climactic battle. You know, that's also very important. But sometimes sometimes there is a logical there kind of has to be a logical progression of some kind as well, because if you just start out with, the two sides smash into each other and then they just fight and you grind it out. That can work, actually. You can summarize things like that pretty well, especially if you're talking like Arthurian knights, that kind of thing. One of my favorite battle scenes in a book I've read was in The Guns of Avalon by Roger Zelazny. And it involves a battle that's very quickly described. It's all first person, but it's a battle basically between, again, King Arthur's knights and some beast men that they're fighting on this medieval style battlefield. And it's like a paragraph long, a good chunky paragraph, and that's it, more or less. I can tell because I read it in the ebook, but you get the idea. Because it just covers the whole day. They're clashing, sides are clashing, the wheeling, and then suddenly, and it just narrows down to a single point. It's so beautiful, and it ends up with two characters choking each other until one of them dies. Spoiler alert! But yeah, no, it's amazing, and that happens in the middle of the book. It's not the climax of the book. Yeah, so having a little bit of summary there is really the right decision, if you ask me. Yep, I love Roger Zelazny's work. He's great. Also, other great battle scenes, probably more like my battle scenes, are in Lord of Light, another of his books, where it's just kind of inspired by the Hindu pantheon, and it's science fiction, and there's battles with demons and stuff. So it's pretty wild. Again, very brief though, fast paced.
And that's the key, right? Is to mix it up a bit and to kind of not so much lead to a climactic battle, but to lead to a battle that leads to furthering a plot at some points too. That's just a natural progression for. I think when we become writers, we go through these natural progressions a lot, and I think a lot of times because those are kind of those books that you're talking about kind of later in his catalog, if I'm not mistaken. Am I wrong on that, or are those pretty early on in his?
I don't know about Lord of Light, but the Amber definitely is.
Yeah. So it's like I think you go through these progressions and you figure out, okay, I've written the big epic battle, climactic battle. Now I've got to use it in a different text, right? That's kind of how that works a little bit.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely. And some people have even said Zelazny's battles they wear on you a little bit. They get old, and it's true because he didn't use a ton of description or anything, so there's not a lot to break to discern these battles. Sometimes these sword fights or duels or even field battles from each other. You don't know. If you were just reading an excerpt, you might not even be able to tell which book it was from if you didn't already know it. That kind of thing. And that to me is something I strive to avoid.
Yeah, for sure. I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. You tend to write in a female perspective too, which is very interesting. I'm finding a lot of fantasy authors really love the female character perspective. What's the drive behind that for you? Well, what is it about a female perspective that you kind of gravitate toward?
Oh yeah, I think partially just it was actually very challenging for me to start writing female perspectives. Though most of the books I have published are written in female perspective, most of the ones I did not publish aren't. But a few of them are, and they were my early tries at it, and they totally fun. I was so bad at it for several novels worth of time that when I'm like, okay, now people are saying my female characters are good, I'm just gonna keep using it. It's kind of like I finally built the toy. Now let's use it. I finally built the car. Now I'm going to drive the thing. That's part of the motivation. Is just it's Jurassic Park. I'm no longer asking why I should. Just that now that I know I can. But that's maybe a flippant answer. In general, I do approach the female perspective because I'm fascinated by women. I think a lot of heterosexual men are, frankly. And probably a lot of other men too, not to mention women. Honestly, I don't know why exactly I started doing it, except that I knew I wanted to understand the characters more and understand real women more. Honestly, and so yeah, that's basically the motivation behind it.
So in writing female characters, you're writing to make them stronger and bolder and all of these things, and giving them kind of a male perspective because your eyes are behind it. but do you feel like the part of the reason why female characters in fantasy kind of work is because they can bring the emotional element that sometimes is missing from, you know, writing creatures and things of that nature that we don't understand.
That, interesting point. I kind of think, and honestly, this might just be because my autism and all that stuff. But I found that a lot of the time my female characters end up being colder and more detached, and it's almost like permission is being. I want to say, especially like Melissa in the Demon Hunter series, she's one of the main characters, and she ends up being almost an austere character in a lot of ways. She's kind of, again, colder than I would have expected, and that's pretty relic of who I was when I created the character. But it's also, I think, an interesting kind of anti-heroic trait that you don't see all that often, and I like to portray things I don't see much in a lot of the time, especially if it's like me, and you're like, okay, so she has emotions, but she's also, like literally an iron woman in some ways. She's tough, and she's also got a level of endurance, both emotionally and physically, that makes her kind of, again, seem insensitive to people. And so there's this, but again, I don't plan that. I don't plan any of my characterization. Indeed, initially, I didn't even know what Melissa was going to be able to do, except I knew she was going to. I needed a character who was going to train to become a wizard, a mage in that series.
What do you feel like? What do you feel like in writing in these in the female perspective has done for you personally? Has it done anything for you personally? Have you felt like there's some growth to you as a person because you're writing in these kind of perspectives?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like I've come to appreciate more the women in my life, but especially as just women, just in general, the people, that we're all human. Doesn't matter who we are, and at least in the real world, all people you can talk to are basically human. But we're going to talk back anyway. But I mean, you can talk to a cat; they're just not going to have much to say. But at least not in English. Jeez, I have to keep qualifying things. So what I mean by that, though, is that I feel like there's an amount of compassion that I was able to build up in my own that comes from trying to understand other people, whether they're women or whether they're something weirder like a demon or something like some of my perspective characters are in some of these series, or a freakish monster, whatever it is they are. Honestly, the thing I regret the most right now is I haven't written more monster main characters. Again, looking at those covers I have up there aren't as many characters that I'd identify with as being a terrible beast of some kind as I would like.
Oh, cool.
So maybe that's going to be my future. Yeah, because I've always identified with the monster a lot. So I feel like maybe what I've been doing is pushing that away, and I need to just accept it. Because again, my best work comes from when I accept myself and I act from my own gut, rather than my head telling me what to do. Yeah.
So where does world building come into play for you in these aspects? Because you're driven by characters a lot, and characters then drive plot. So are you kind of thinking about where to slip world building in? Does it happen naturally within like a description where you're kind of going through a scene and you need some description? Where do you find your most effective world building happens?
World building is definitely my favorite part of pre-writing, because I definitely do more of that in advance than anything else. Because I'll build up. I mean, sometimes I'll come up with like a brief idea of the character. And I have a note sheet for each character that I'll, each main character that I'll make but I mostly add those notes as the story progresses. But with the world, I'll have ideas of what the world is like in advance, and it's kind of dreamlike in that sense. For example, the story I'm working on now involves, living guardians that are intelligent as computers. They're used as computers by this fantasy civilization, but they're plants. So there's a bizarre combination there. and but that is going to inform a ton of what the world's going to look like because their technology is plant based, not metal based in that regard, right? Or not entirely metal based, right? They use metal to interface with the plants, but that's it as far as their information tech. So there's a certain so that changes. So when you go to basically what would be a communication center, well, it's covered in vines and stuff, and it's a natural fit that way. Because those are the relays, and I like to find, but honestly, I mean, I'm kind of, I like to think I'm a pretty good world builder, but it comes from kind of a brain dead location where it's just my instinct tells me that would be neat. I want to do that. And sometimes that means I have recurring motifs. Like actually the vines are a pretty big motif in a lot of my settings, from big old vines that girdle entire planet-sized pillars in the pillar universe. In one of my unpublished work, there's an old rundown bank in this post-apocalyptic world, and there's a tree on top of it, and its roots are growing down the side of the building like vines, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of other examples, but I like that kind of. But I mean, so there's sometimes consistent imagery between works, which is a problem for me actually, because I want to try to make things varied. That's one of my missions, is to change things up and not bore people, or not make it seem like. And I'm nothing against Stephen King, but I don't want to make it seem like, well, in this world, there just are psychic trees or whatever.
Yeah.
That's just how it is in all my worlds. That's not what I want to do. And I say psychic trees, they're actually, go on. Psychic trees do exist in my settings, but that's not something I've just tossed out there.
They're not part of the battles, are they? What like Tolkien does with his trees? They don't fight in the battles.
There is a tree in Orphan Mage. There's actually a tree that kills people. Yes, in battle. But it's not like an ent. It doesn't walk around like a person. It's more like a jellyfish or something, because its roots are what it's around on.
Gotcha.
And that's why it makes it so dangerous, because its roots can turn ghostly and then turn solid again. So it can cut through basically anything with one of those.
So it's does it do kind of like an anaconda thing, where it kind of grabs you and squeezes you, kind of thing?
Oh no, just cut you in half with its root, because its root can cut through almost any material, because it's designed to cut through the earth, so to make it easier to crawl around. It's a very strange tree. Let me put it that way. Also, it's actually pretty scary. I mean, if you think about it, like, wait, that tree is just murdered my buddies. What's going on? It's a whirlwind of destruction, basically. Yeah.
So, as a discovery writer,
it's a nice tree.
How do you variable the world building then? You mentioned you want to do it because you don't want to be boring, but if you're kind of leaning on your prowess a little bit, you probably repeat a lot more than you'd like to. So how do you vary it?
Well, I mean, I try to start from far off places, because that's how the bit of work I do before I start writing a book is I kick things off by building a premise. Right? I build a premise, so it says, okay, this is, and that's where I'll take stuff out that I don't want from the kind of concept that I imagined at first, or I'll add other things in that'll make it either more my style or less my style, depending on what I need. So I do plan a little bit, but I don't plan the plot. Is the main thing I don't plan. I don't plan plot or characters. Basically, stuff we've talked about already. But I find it's important for me to come up with the setting kind of in advance, because that gives me a grounding for where the characters come from. And then it determines where the plot's going to go, because it's like the big world problems, right? Which are huge in fantasy, are basically baked into the setting. So I consider those to be part of the conflict that way.
Are there rules you stick by that you adhere to from your history, love of history, and your love of fantasy as a fan? Are there rules that you've incorporated from other sources and other places that have been created solely for the purpose of fantasy writing that you adhere to, that you will never break?
I don't think so. I'd really rather not, except for the the general dramatic rules. I try to follow those kind of religiously. I want to make my story satisfying, but that's not fantasy. That's just storytelling.
That's just structure, right? So
yeah, and I do lean heavily on structure too. Yeah. Nice to see you too, Josh. Definitely have a good one.
So, are you a 3-act guy then? Are you someone who stays in 3 acts?
No, I don't tend to I don't tend to do 3 acts. I can, but 3 acts kind of isn't my speed. I like 4 or 5 usually. The 4-act Kisho Tenketsu from Japan is one of my favorites that I've been working on lately. Yeah,
I was just gonna say you're probably because I know you're heavy into anime and stuff like that too. So that probably makes a lot of sense. I tend to find that.
But the other thing,
go ahead.
Go on.
No.
You finish your thought. Okay, sure. So what I tend to do is I think in episodes almost nowadays, like or I'll make a structure for myself, like I did with the current series. I'm like, okay, so this series is going to be military fantasy with some espionage elements, right? And I'm trying to do more of a series. I'm trying to stick with the series longer. It's very difficult to do that, as I'd explained earlier. So I said to myself, what am I going to do? What am I going to do to make the series stick with me? Well, I'm going to come up with my own formula for writing each book. And it's going to be maybe the same formula for each book, but I'll fool with it,
you basically were just going to answer my my follow-up question, which is, I find that people who are into anime and things like that, they tend to write in almost that fashion where there's episodics and there's a stretching of the second act into the third act kind of idea. There's a lot of that in anime, and so I find that when you become a fan of that stuff, you really kind of gravitate toward that structure.
Yeah, it's a structure that you don't see as much in traditional fantasy novels because, again, at least European style fantasy novels, Western style fantasy novels. And I like to change things up. That's one of the reasons maybe up to me because I grew up with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and all these books, and then I said to myself, well, now this new thing appeared. I did get into anime later than that other stuff, and that's like, okay, I'm going to try that for a while, or I'm going to try that all the time because I do like it a lot.
Is it kind of like the Matrix? Once you take the pill, though, you can't unsee it. Do you feel like once you've attempted a story in that structure, it's hard to go back to the traditional structure, or can you do that pretty easily?
I guess so, and I think I'd agree with that because I don't tend to go back to the traditional structure, so it definitely held true for me.
Nice. I'm curious if there's a mythos or a world or something to that effect, and maybe I'm spoiling something that's ahead for you, but I'm curious if there is a mythos or something that you've always gravitated toward that has always been in your purview, but you've never attempted to write in that maybe you'd like to at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to say because writing is one of my main forms of artistic expression, and I do like to express myself. So I've written in a lot of settings that I've not completed a novel in, though. A lot of my stories, my worlds don't have any released books, but I also worked on Kindle Vella for a while, so I have incomplete Vellas that include most of the books that would be in that category. Because I tried them out, and I said, I can't do this on Kindle Vella. Keep writing this as a serial, it just isn't going to work for me. But one of my main ones was the Maker Mythos, which I did release some novels in, but there are no novels out from that currently. And that's urban fantasy to a large extent. But it also has a lot of secondary world elements because people in it that can create new worlds are a major factor. They can create worlds with their own species and systems and everything. And they're human. These creators are human, and that setting does feed into some other settings, of course. Not going to spoil which ones, but most of the fantasy sets are kind of interconnected in some ways. That's how I'm working on it now, anyway. I used to be so religious about keeping them apart, but then I'm like, well, but there's so many things that'd be cool if they could cross over a little bit.
More story ideas too, right?
Be flexible. Yeah, exactly. And so actually, I'd say, yeah, again, I look up there. I think the only ones that aren't connected directly, the only fantasy books that aren't connected that I currently have out are the Orphan Mage and Warrior Mage series. That's kind of a separate setting.
That's kind
universe.
of another staple of anime too. Is there's a lot of crossovers. Like they tend to characters from other worlds
comics in general, right?
Yeah,
like comic books and some manga, comics, all that stuff. There's crossovers everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, even some fantasies are doing it now. Kind of it's kind of interesting.
Well, Brandon Sanderson, with his huge Kickstarter and everything. Not exactly an indie, but he's all his fantasy worlds are linked together. They're all part of this larger mythos.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know Con Lavery, but Con does the same thing. He has
he's my first guest ever.
He writes separate stories, but they're all part of this arcing like central universe that have kind of come that he kind of touches everything on. It's kind of interesting, and then
Con's brilliant.
Yeah, he uses
a lot of. I haven't read his books in a while.
Yeah, he uses a lot of that foreshadowing to kind of and little Easter egging to kind of connect everything too. Sometimes it's not so subtle as Sanderson is. Sanderson's right in your face with it. But I mean,
right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't really read Sanderson anymore. There's just too much to do. It's kind of like Marvel. I can't follow those movies anymore. There's just I'm like I'm done. I'm tired of this. It was good while it lasted, but now I think I've gotten what I'm going to get out of it.
I'm kind of with you on that. I found like this new trajectory Marvel's been on. I kind of feel like Endgame kind of ended it for me, and I was kind of happy about that a little bit.
That's where I was at. Yeah, I mean, you watch 20 movies. I think that's plenty of movies. That's a good series there.
Yeah,
it's a mega series. And not all of them were perfect, but hey, overall, I still kind of like it.
Yeah. Disney likes to milk things. I mean, they've been milking the Star Wars universe for the.
Oh, don't get me started, man. I was a huge Star Wars fan as a kid. I can't do it anymore. I can't call myself that anymore.
Yeah. I'm curious too. Are there tropes that you love that you kind of incorporate often? Is there something thematically that connect all of your books? Not so much that their worlds are together or they're the same building, but do you feel like there's a common thread theme that you have that you kind of like to gravitate towards?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and it definitely does come down to the individual relationship between lovers. Really, it's that's what I find most fascinating about the characterization is that what makes these characters fall in love, and that's not a spoiler. There's a lot of romantic subplots in my books. Practically every book has something going on in that regard.
Which is another unique thing for you in fantasy. That's not something that fantasy is often known for.
Yeah, maybe that's my problem. Maybe more people would read me if I wasn't doing it. But hey, that's what I do.
Or maybe more people. Maybe you're marketing to the wrong people, Tim.
I could be. I mean, I do. I mean, who wants to read about battles of hand monsters and romance? I don't know.
Fans of The Princess Bride. Hey.
That's a good point. That's a good point. How many hands can a hand monster have if the Princess Bride is involved? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not my. I mean, it really is what drew me into writing is the relationship stuff that is. And I'm not necessarily good at writing it. Maybe that's why I don't market to it. I'm not comfortable. I'm not confident with coming down. But maybe I should practice more. That's probably what the moral of the story is. I need to train more.
Well, yeah, I would. Anybody who watches this, encourage Tim to talk more about, and anybody who's read his stuff, encourage him to talk more about this stuff. Then let's see if we can create a groundswell for you.
We could all use a groundswell now and then, right? We could all use more help. And I honestly, that's one of the things that, I mean, most of my books are centered around a single relationship, partially because, and weirdly, I think this comes from the fact that because I'm a twin, I have an identical twin.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's almost always a trio of characters. There's the main character, and then there's the character of the same sex who's like their best friend, and the character of the opposite sex who's their love interest. That's like the trio that's very commonly used. So that's my trio in a lot of books. It's and it's not a love triangle because they do all love each other usually, but it's not a competitive thing, you know. It's just the center of a bunch of relationships that make up a series, a network.
That ups the stakes too, right? That's kind of that helps up the stakes a little bit, I would assume.
Oh yeah, definitely. I thought, and also it gives me options. Like for example, in Orphan Mage. Sorry, I know we're running out of time, but in Orphan Mage, the main character was originally going to be the best friend, and the best friend was going to be the main character. But I switched them because I thought it would make more sense if the orphan character was having a harder time of it would be the main character, and then the Whale Prince could be the side character. Yeah, the best friend.
All right, so I have one more question for you that I want you to answer in this episode because I wrote it down and I find it important. I'm curious, and it's kind of led it up to this anyway because we've naturally kind of come to this. But I'm curious about how much of you goes into what you write. Is there are you able to detach yourself and compartmentalize a lot more than you think you do, or do you feel like there's a lot more of you? And is it something that has grown to be that for you?
I definitely the more I write, the more I put into each book. That's me, and the more I'm willing to be upfront with it. You know, I mean, I want to be open, and you know, I'm a pretty open guy. I'm an open book. I'll tell anybody almost anything about myself, and it's kind of embarrassing, but it's the truth. And it's not exactly. I mean, so in that way, I'm just a callow youth with a giant beard, and nobody can think of me that way based on appearance. But I would stare directly into the camera and just say, you know, I did write those tentacle monsters. Those were in the book. There was sex scenes with them. Sorry, that's how it is. That's what I wrote. There were sex scenes with them. That's how you say that. My bad. And yeah, I am a bashful guy on some level, but I also don't want to hold back anymore. I need to continue putting forth the most of everything that I have. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And that's what I mean by work. I mean, I want it to be me, and I want it to do what I wanted to do because the reason I got into writing was books weren't doing what I wanted. I got bored of them in a lot of ways, or I got annoyed. You know,
and rewrote them.
Yeah, exactly. I had to make my own because I wasn't having as much fun as I should have had.
Well, I could tell you this has been a great conversation, my friend. Always great talking to you. I mean, we do this pretty regularly anyway, and it's pretty nice to have a sit down and talk to you one-on-one about this stuff and kind of go through stuff. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do that. Tell everybody where they can check out these wonderful books of yours and give us a sense of some things out there that people can check out. You know, give us a little synopsis of a couple things going on.
Okay, so timniederriter.com/books has all the book covers. You can just click it and then you'll see them all. But so that's kind of the hub where you can find them all. But the brief summary is, you know, Origin of Storms, my long book. It's a huge epic space opera. And it's also a love story like all my books. but it's about a woman trying to find this guy who she's lost, but she doesn't know if she wants to find him so she can rekindle her relationship with him, or she wants to punish him for what he's done because he's been up to bad shit. And then that's all based against the backdrop of this future frontier kind of situation. Then the Mangrove Suite is actually from a similar period, so you might see a similarity here. Like I said, I fight the similarities, but they do appear. But this is the man is the main character in this like post-apocalyptic city. He finds this woman whose memory has been erased from his past, and he tries to get her memories back. And there's also a massacre in every book in that series. Just so you know, that's one of the things I played with in every book.
Interesting.
Some people get slaughtered. There's a bloody series. And then Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter is a series, is my kind of my, I hoped it would be my flagship. I still hope it might be someday. But it's on hold right now because I'm distracted all the time. So, but it is a series about immortals and demons and magic, people who use the power to be of magic to take on the form of defeated demons, basically. And then they I was going to say they fight crime, but they don't. They fight each other usually. And there's a lot of politics and a lot of discovery because the world's very deep and secreted, and there's a lot of secrets hidden in that setting, including the nature of the goddess they all worship, the one who dwells on high. Yeah, and that's all I'm going to say about her. She's kind of important. Mother Mercy, all praise be.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir, very much. It's been a great conversation. As always, everybody, thank you for checking us out, and subscribe, like, do all those wonderful things you do. And remember that it's always time to go indie now, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody.